Can you all see my screen? Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, I'm able to see that.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So this is let me create it as hello sir Sundarraga namaste. I'll just keep it at my desktop. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is we will discuss SAP's architecture in detail, and we will discuss about system landscape. Okay, and we will also discuss about the navigation in SAP system. So these are the three things that we will do today, and then we will start with organization structure tomorrow. Okay, so let's start discussing about the architecture that we have seen on the other day. As you could see, this is the slide that I have shared with you during my yesterday's demo session. Like I said, you have three layers in the architecture. That is the name, as the name SAP R3 indicates, real-time three-tier architecture. So the three-tier architecture means, as you could see here, this is how the three layers of an SAP system is available. So in the first layer, what we call it as a presentation layer, which is also called as client layer. Basically, that contains all the software components. Okay, that contains all the software components that specializes in interacting with the end users from the presentation layer. In the sense, what is meant by interacting with the end user? For example, sorry, anybody has got any question? You see here,
Sir, your screen is yes, this is there.
as you can see here, if I want to type here something like hi, see, this is what we call as interaction. This is what we call as end user interaction, which is nothing but user interface. So your client layer, which is nothing but presentation layer, those components resides in the presentation layer, are specialized in interacting with the end user from the presentation layer. Okay, there's a spelling mistake here. It's not from, it's from the presentation layer. So that means whatever the Yahoo Messenger or Yahoo Chat, Google Chat, etc., which we use, they are called user interface screens. In other way, some of you are already working as an end users. The screens that you enter, that screens where you enter data, they are called user interface screens. So your presentation layer contains the software components which are specialized in interacting with the end users from the presentation layer, right? So in other way, from SAP perspective, if I have to say, you see here, everybody knows about this SAP logon pad. You see here, I'm just clicking on the logon pad. It's like your Yahoo Messenger. Like if I double click Yahoo Messenger, you would see the what you call the logon screen, right? Yeah, you can see here logon screen. So I give the user ID and password, and then I click on sign. So once I go with sign in, the data that I enter here, the user ID and password, okay, will go and get validated in the Yahoo server. Similarly, the data that I enter here, for example, from the SAP Easy Access or rather from the SAP logon pad, you see here this is my server. If I go with the log on, like whatever you see here in the Yahoo Messenger, the logon screen, here also you would see a logon screen. So here, when I enter the user ID and password here, the user ID and password that I am adding here. So some screen is allowing me to add this user ID and password. So this is called user's interface or the UI screens. So this will, the user ID and password that I am entering will be validated, and if they are valid details, only then system allows me to log into the system. Okay, so like whatever I display here in the Yahoo Messenger. So let me get back to the screen. So the user ID and password that I entered here, they will not get validated in my laptop which I am working with. Where will they get validated? They get validated in
Application.
SAP application server, which is nothing but simply SAP server. I don't know where is it, my SAP application server is residing. For example, you see here, I logged into this system. Okay, so if I look at the server IP address, this is my server IP address 183.82.138.212. I really do not know where is this server located. It may be in India, it may be in US, I don't know. And in fact, I even need not have to know where my server is located. What I should be knowing is, if I enter logon details, if my user ID and password is valid, then I will be hooked up with my SAP server. That's all I wanted. Okay, so therefore the SAP logon application is actually residing in the SAP server. So what is there in your laptop or in my laptop? This is just nothing but this logon pad. This is what we call it as front-end application. Although this is a shortcut, if you look into all programs, somewhere you would see SAP front-end or SAP logon something. Where is it? Yeah, you see here SAP front-end. Okay, SAP GUI, right? SAP logon. So this is the application. Okay, only this particular application is residing in my laptop. Once you install your SAP logon pad on your machines, you will also have only this particular. So your client machine, that is the system from which the end user is accessing. It need not be end user. It could be functional guy. It could be system administrator also. Whoever is working on his machine, that machine contains only the GUI interface, graphical user interface application, nothing else. All the respective applications based on your role and responsibility that you play for a particular project or for a particular organization, based on that you will be given access to certain applications. All those applications will be residing in your application server. Okay, so your application server contains software components that specializes in processing business applications from the application server. Okay, so what does mean by processing business applications from the application server? I know there are 3 or 4 people working in the purchasing department in this group. So what do? They basically may be converting purchase requisitions into purchase orders, or they may be displaying, or if they wanted to see all the purchase orders raised for a particular vendor, okay, for a specific material, or all these things are nothing but processing the business applications data. So if you want to process business application data, again you require a user interface. For example, let me go into the SAP screen. You see here, I'll just go with one transaction, something called ME2L. Okay, my intention is to see all the purchase orders created for say particular 1000 purchasing organization. Okay, document type means purchase order type is so and so, plant for so and so plant. I'm sorry, the next one is plant. Plant is this one. Okay, and do I have the document creation date? Yes, I do have. let's say I wanted to see all the purchase orders created for, okay, give me a moment, 06, okay, so 0402, okay, so this is the, right, like this. I wanted to see all the purchase orders created, for plant 1000, okay, by the purchasing department 1000. If I go and hit enter, you see here, this screen is called as user interface screen. Okay, this, how do you get this access to this? I have entered here ME2L. This is nothing but a transaction code. So the transaction code I have entered in the client layer, in the presentation layer. So this ME2L has been passed to my application server, where this application is residing. So once there is a program relevant for this ME2L, if it finds out, then that application triggers, which will have this user interface screen, and then the system is allowing me to enter data into the respective fields. This is called user interaction with the application. Once I enter the data that is supposed to be entered, I will again go with execute. So when I go with execute, you see all these 1000 best, etc., all these things that I am adding here in the application, they will go and get processed. Look at here. Now what it is doing, system is processing. System is processing. You see, it has pulled up so many purchase orders. This is what we call it as processing application data. So where is this processing takes place? This processing takes place in app server, application server. So I have given just only 5 months data, so therefore it did come up in fraction of a second. If it is 5 years data, it may take little longer. If it is 15 years data, it might take some more time. So therefore, the inference here is for the application server, these are very highly specialized in processing business applications, okay, from the application server. So what do they require? Because they have to process huge amount of data, obviously they require a better RAMs, right? And then when I clicked execute in the previous screen, you see here when I go with execute here, what is it doing? A certain query was built inside the program, and the query searches for the records relevant for this particular data into database, right? So it means what? Whatever the query that I have passed in, what query did I pass in? Date range between 01/01/2012 to 17/5/2012. In this range, what are all the purchase orders created by purchasing department 1000? So this data or the validations have gone to the database tables, relevant database tables, and then it fetched the data, right? So therefore, the database layer, which contains all the software components that are specialized in management, storage, and retrieval of data from the database layer. So what it does, when I've given the input in the selection screen, or what we call user input screen, the data has been taken and passed into the query internally, and the query is actually executed on the database tables, that is here. Once the data records have been fetched or identified, and then the fetching of those data records are again displayed through application layer onto the presentation server. Okay, so this is how the actual processing takes place behind the screens. Okay, as you can see here, presentation layer components resides in the presentation servers. What is presentation server? Which is nothing but my laptop, your laptop, or whoever is working with your own machine. Those systems are capable of providing graphical interface. What do you mean by graphical interface? This is graphical interface. Here system is allowing me to enter data. This is called graphical interface. Then your application layer components, they resides in application server. Application server is nothing but the information that I've shown you. When you go with this particular change item, you would see the IP server, IP details of the application server. So this is what application server is. So the application layer components, they resides in application server. All the applications are residing in application server. When I say application, all your SAP MM transactions, all your SAP FI, COI, SD, whatever business transactions that you carry out in a day-to-day business operations, they are all called applications or application components. They resides in application server. Because the application server has to process huge amount of data, that is the reason they are specialized systems processing data. Okay, so specialized systems with multiple CPUs and vast amounts of RAM. Why you require multiple CPU? Can anybody tell me?
Any type of number of CPUs, various varieties. I think.
Correct, sir. Number of CPUs is correct, but why do we require those many CPUs?
This
Imagine,
is
yeah, imagine a
processing unit.
yeah, something like that. Imagine a customer like insurance company. They would be having huge amounts of customer base. So if you want to process the data of such a huge customer base, maybe one CPU may not be sufficient. Okay, so you might require group of a couple of CPUs or 3-4 CPUs grouped together. So therefore, whichever processor is available for processing this data, that can be used, or the speed of these multiple CPUs will be used for processing the huge amount of data that your application server components processes. And also you have to have huge RAMs, like 2 GB, 4 GB may not be sufficient when you are processing the real-time data. For server component, you have to have some what you call gigabytes of RAM. And your database layer components, they resides in database servers. Okay, so what do you mean by database server? Which is nothing but your database, like people call it as RDBMS, means relational database management systems. So whether you enter purchase requisition data, purchase order data, or invoice data, or whatever data that you enter, everything finally gets stored in database tables. So that all the data, whether it is business data, that is transactional data, or a master data, or the configurations which we do as a functional consultants, everything finally has to get stored in tables. That is what we call it as database tables. So those database tables resides in database layer. So therefore, SAP by define, by design, what we call it as, SAP has got more than 120,000 tables, predefined standard tables. Apart from that, when you are implementing SAP for a specific customer, we do create our own tables, maybe few dozens or few hundreds, depending upon your requirement, the customer, how critical or how variant the customer requirements are there. So therefore, your database servers should be specialized in such a way that they should allow us with fast and large hard drives. Why fast and large hard drives? Unless you have a big, too huge hard disk, it cannot accommodate data of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, something like that. Unless it is fast, the fetching of the records from the database and handing over it to the application layer component is not so easy. So therefore, you require fast and large hard drives for the database components. Okay, so finally, this is how the architecture looks like. In the client layer or in the presentation layer, all the end users of the company, they are networked together. That is nothing but you are in what we call LAN. Okay, you will be connected through LAN in your company network, okay, which are installed across many PCs. And then your application layer, like we have discussed, it may contain all the applications may reside in one CPU or in multiple CPUs. This is what we call the split architecture. If your applications are placed in more than one system, either based on number of applications or based on geographies, okay, you can actually distribute your applications on multiple servers. If you are doing that, that is called a split architecture. Okay, but these two systems should be networked with each other and they should be grouped with the same IP. And finally, you have this database layer, whether the user who is sitting here or who is sitting on the extreme end, or maybe whether this user is sitting in America, this user is sitting in India, wherever you are, the applications are same, and the data that you process will get processed by application and finally will get saved into one database. Okay, so this is how the architecture.
Sir, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Can we have a multiple database?
You cannot. If you have multiple database, system will not know from which database the record needs to be picked up, because what we do in the programs as an developer is, like for example, let me take the same case. The you see here, when I go with execute, I said a query will be built inside the program saying that select all purchase orders created for plant 1000, for purchase organization 1000, right, between so and so date, in which system, in which server. That cannot be there. So the thing that you are asking is ruled out. In SAP, or for that matter any ERP system, will have only one database. You may have multiple application servers. It could be 2 or it could be more also. But only one database should be there.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Now, look at here on this slide. You see this is R3 end user, like you, me, somebody else. When we enter command from the presentation layer, it will be passed on to the application server via what we call it as a dialog processors and message servers. Basically, there is something called message server whose job is to collect the command from the end user, pass it on to the application server. Okay, and then the actual data will get processed over here. So the same message server will also establish communication between the application servers, multiple application servers if you have it. Otherwise, message server's responsibility is to collect the command from the end user, pass it on to the respective application server, and then from the application server, when the query is built, it will go into database. So therefore, it has to go to database, fetch the records, right? And then once the records are identified, it has to be taken back into application server, where you will have the graphical user interface to display the data in the format which the user wants it, and the display will be done here. Okay, so this is how the actual R3 works behind the screens. You need not have to know all these things, but it should be known by the basis administrators, the system administrators. As an MM consultant or an FSU or SD consultant, you will never be working on these things. It's their responsibility. So that's about what we call the architecture. Now let me explain you. Sorry, any questions?
Yes, sir.
Please.
Sir, are you able to hear me?
Yes, Lakshmi.
Okay. Who will be responsible for designing the tables in the database application layer, sir?
Designing the database table is the responsibility of the technical consultant, ABAP consultant. But he will not design the table just like that. Before him, you will have a functional contact or a functional consultant whose job is to collect the requirements from the end user, from the process owner. Let's say you will have a purchasing manager in your company. If I am the functional consultant, and if your purchasing manager wanted certain functionality, he will call me, Venkat, I need this functionality. Can you please help me how to get this one? So I'll ask him, okay, I'll set up a call with him. I will set up a meeting and I'll try to get all the requirements that he wants it. So I will understand, once I understand the requirements, I will create something called functional specification document, right? So
Okay.
that functional specification document contains what is the input that the end user wanted to give, what is the output that he is expected to get from the system, and how the system should process inside the data. He will just say how it should process. He'll say you take this data for this particular from one field, you take data from some other field, you take data from some other field, you club them together, and then you filter it, you get the data, and then finally you display me first column one let's say material number, second column material description, third column material group, whatever output format, input, etc. They will give it. How to process, they will give you the logic, right? And then once I get the requirements, I'll create the functional spec, which basically contains the words of the end user, my process owner, and the words from the technical perspective, which my ABAPer or the technical person understands it. So once I create the functional spec, I'll forward the spec to the process owner from whom I've taken requirements. He should approve it, saying that yes, this is what I wanted. Once the functional spec is approved, I will also approve it as a functional consultant, and then I'll hand over the functional spec to my technical team, that is ABAP team. The ABAP team try to understand that. In case if they have any problem in understanding it, they'll approach me. It's my responsibility to explain them what is required and why we require this. And based on the necessity, in case if there is no standard table available for storing certain data in the SAP screen field, he will then think of creating a new table. He will just not create just like that. He will create based on the
Okay.
functional requirements that I give.
Right.
Okay. So
Thanks, sir.
yeah, not a problem. Any other questions from anybody? So with this, we are concluding the architecture. I just wanted to give you this what you call introduction on the architecture, because nobody is going to question you what is architecture in interview. But the thing is, being an SAP consultant, when you say SAP R3, you have to understand what is R3 and what are the layers